All right, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. Welcome to this third installment of the 2024-25 season of the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice. My name is Tim Lorick, and I'm director of this program here at the College of St. Scholastica. Our series this year is titled, What is Peace? Our first event in September featured the film What I Want You to Know and a discussion with veteran Garrett Reppenhagen, co-sponsored by the Duluth chapter of Veterans for Peace. Our second event in December featured a local panel of speakers engaged in peacemaking projects in our community. Throughout this academic year, the Alworth Center has also been busy supporting a variety of student events on campus. In all, we are examining questions such as what does it really mean to live in peace? How is peace accomplished or sustained? How can we be better advocates for peace in our communities? We hope you will continue to join us as we explore these questions. For more information about this year's series, please visit our calendar at css.edu/peace. Before introducing tonight's speaker, I'd like to announce our next event, the concluding event in this year's series. On Thursday, April 24th, we will welcome the Resonance Network, a Washington, D.C.-based group working for a world rooted in mutual care, dignity, and our capacity to thrive. Our Thursday evening program will be a free public event and feature stories and opportunities for discussion. The next day, Friday, April 25th, we will host a free workshop at the College of St. Scholastica led by the Resonance Network as part of their Workshopping the Worldview program. Please be on the lookout for more information about these events, and we hope you will join us. In the meantime, you can find more information about the Resonance Network on their website, which is resonance-network.org. If you do not already receive emails from the Alworth Center and would like to be added to the email list to receive updates and information, please add your name to the sign-up sheet in the auditorium entrance, which is right through those doors. After our event tonight, there will be refreshments and a book signing with our guest author, courtesy of Ficker's Bookstore, as well as a table featuring representatives from our local chapter of Veterans for Peace. This will be a great opportunity to continue the conversation, purchase a book, and add your name to our email list. Before we begin, a few brief acknowledgments are due. These lectures are sponsored by the Alworth Center for the Study of Peace and Justice at the College of St. Scholastica and funded in part by the Manitou Fund, the DeWitt and Carolyn Van Evera Foundation, and the Mary C. Van Evera Foundation Endowed Fund in memory of William Van Evera, as well as the Eddy Foundation, with additional support from the Royal D. Alworth Jr. Institute at the University of Minnesota Duluth, the UMD Department of World Languages and Cultures, the Duluth Reader, and other private donors. Our speaker tonight also presented at noon today to our student community in our Dignitas program, a common course for first-year students at the college. I'd like to thank the staff, faculty, and student teaching assistants involved in the Dignitas program, as well as the other staff at the College of St. Scholastica who helped make these events possible. Thank you all. Without further ado, let me introduce tonight's speaker. Diana Oestreich is an author, activist, and soldier turned peacemaker. She's a nationally recognized speaker at the intersection of justice, peace, nonviolence, faith, and how everyday peacemakers are changing our world. She teaches how we can show up right where we live to wage peace across the lines that divide us and unmake violence. She served as a combat medic on the battlefield of the Iraq War and was awarded the Army Commendation Medal and the Iraq Campaign Medal. She is an RN formerly working with hospice and cancer patients before becoming a sexual assault nurse examiner connecting healthcare to justice by advocating for victim survivors in the courtroom. Her book, Waging Peace, One Soldier's Story of Putting Love First, exposes the false divide between loving our country and living out our higher call to love our enemies. Whether we perceive our enemy as the neighbor with an opposing political viewpoint, a religion that is different than ours, or the person born across our borders. Diana intends to empower us to identify our own rural, urban, political, or religious divides to cross our own enemy lines in order to remake the world and heal all that's tearing us apart. Diana is the founder of the Waging Peace Project, a movement activating everyday people to commit small acts of courage right where we live. And Diana and her partner Jake and 2 sons live along the shores of Lake Superior on Ojibwe land. They're an Ethiopian-American family woven together through adoption and a shared love for bad jokes, bocce ball, and competitive card games. Please join me in welcoming Diana Oestreich.
It is an honor to be here. I don't often get to share my story. In my hometown, my family thinks I live at the airport, but it's not true. I really do live in Duluth. But before I share my story, I just wanted to ask you all to be kind to my story, because it is a vulnerable story, and it includes trauma and pain and also beautiful things. And so I'm still the person that experienced all these things today. And so sometimes, even though these stories I know by heart, it's easier on my heart to read some of them. So that is my welcome into my story, and to say that I'm really grateful and honored, because when someone witnesses your story, there is something that creates healing. So thank you so much for being here. War was nothing like I imagined. We had just landed in Iraq, and I was 23 years old with a combat medic bag strapped to my back, deployed to the Iraq War. We were in a hot tent late at night getting our briefing for how our convoy was going to go the next day, when we would go into enemy territory. The commander described an enemy tactic where they would push little Iraqi children in front of a convoy. And then when the truck stopped to avoid harming the child, the enemy would ambush the soldiers at the end, who couldn't move forward and they couldn't move away. I repeat, if you slow the convoy to avoid harming a child, you will be responsible for your battle buddies getting ambushed. If anybody isn't able to do your duty and keep the convoy rolling at all costs, stand up now and identify yourself. The tent was silent. I wasn't sure if I could run over a child to obey this direct order from my commander. I believed in sacrificing to serve my country, but this pricked at my conscience. I had 8 hours to decide. Back inside my tent that night, I found my green cot, and I laid down and tried to trick myself into sleeping. The commander's words were lodged in my brain. You have to do your duty, even if it means running over a child. Everything I believed about being a soldier and my Christian faith growing up reassured me that this was okay. Soldiers did hard things. I knew that. My country and my faith taught me that to serve God was also to serve my country. So if I took a life, it was ultimately taking a life for God. But something else was crushing my chest like a vice grip, and I couldn't sleep and I couldn't even breathe. How could I choose between the life of an Iraqi child or my battle buddy? The impossibility of this choice was breaking me apart on the inside. Whose life would I take, and whose life would I protect? All night I wrestled. I have to take a life to save a life. And then from the darkness, like a lightning strike, I heard, "But Diana, I love them too." God stopped me in my tracks with his words of love. And in a minute, all the tension just melted out of my chest, because I knew it was true. I knew that God loved an Iraqi child just as much as God loved me, that he was fiercely protective of their future just as much as God cared about my future. Now, this is a really inconvenient time for God to finally knock me on the shoulder and make this make sense to me. But what was I supposed to do in 8 short hours if a child was pushed in front of my convoy? This was the very first time that I questioned my own violence. It was the first time that I felt caught between what my conscience required of me and my country demanded of me. I knew one thing. I would never run over a child, no matter who ordered me to do it. My allegiance was to life, not death, and nobody could take that away from me. I'm an American soldier, and I'm a peace activist who went from waging war to waging peace. Now, from Syrian refugee camps to protesting on the steps of City Hall, marching for Black lives, to making meals alongside my unsheltered neighbors, I have witnessed in all of these places the power of peace to disarm violence and defeat injustice. My life on the battlefield, waging war, and unmaking violence in America has been a study in what I've come to call waging peace. Waging peace is how we disarm violence and we fight for each other in order to get what war can't give us: justice and joy. And now, in this moment, when our country is declaring war on human rights and the most vulnerable, I believe that waging peace is the call to action that we've been waiting for. Now, if you cringe when people say, peace is the answer, I do too. I'm a soldier. I'm a third-generation Army veteran. Growing up, peace was a dirty word for hippies and hobos who just didn't understand sacrifice or how the real world worked. So let me show you how I came to see peace as a force for disarming violence through 3 lessons. Now, on the day we convoyed into enemy territory, these children ran alongside our trucks, but none were pushed in front of our convoy. But you never know the day that your life will change or who will do it. Her name was Hassan. It was a hot, ordinary day in a local village, and as I shuffled down a path, I saw a door creak open and a woman stand in the shadows. Woman to woman, we stared at each other because she had done the universal waved me in. And I had no idea why this woman was inviting an American soldier to go behind the walls of her home. Should I trust this woman? She could be bait, luring me into an attack where I'd be taken by the enemy, hiding behind the door, and I'd never be heard from again. And looking around, I noticed that I had wandered away from the safety of my battle buddies. Alarm bells of danger started to ring in my head, and I felt the panic building in my chest. I didn't know what I should do. I didn't know whether she was safe or not, even though everything in my training and my survival instinct screamed at me to walk away and fast. Something else was drawing me towards her, and I couldn't ignore it. I knew that I could decide to protect myself, or I was going to take a risk and move toward this woman instead of away. Something bigger was challenging my wartime survival instincts. Her eyes locked on mine, and I couldn't ignore her. I had a choice to make. I could walk away or to accept the fireworks in my chest telling me not to miss this, to pay attention, even if I didn't understand what was happening. Inhaling hard, I felt my heart beating like I was on the edge of the high dive. Her invitation to choose hope over fear dared me to be fully human in middle of an inhumane war. But I still had to make a choice, and I didn't know if I could do it. Her twinkling eyes dared me to believe that I had something extravagant to give instead of something priceless to protect. I could settle for staying alive, or I could dare to live in middle of this war. This dangerous hope propelled me into this woman's home, and I've never been the same. I walked through her doorway that day, and she pulled me into her arms, and she wrapped them around me, and we hugged, and we laughed. Today, I know that this woman changed my life forever. She interrupted my well-worn path of self-protection with her invitation of unearned trust. Despite my uniform announcing me as an invader of her country, with my gun strapped to my hip and my bulletproof vest, she saw me. And she claimed me as one of hers to love. Now, throughout my deployment, I would drink tea on the rug with her family, with her daughters and her grandchildren. And in the middle of it, when I found myself finding it so hard to say no to fear and hate, she would remind me to stay human in the middle of it all. This was my first lesson in waging peace. Peace forges belonging instead of division. Peace does what bullets and bombs can't. It wins people. Peace wins people to their side because it convinces us to protect each other instead of eliminate each other. And it tells us the truth that we are each other's people. We belong to each other. Now, violence requires me to make someone the enemy, make someone else's life disposable. Peace defeats violence because it convinces us to always defend each other. War told me my purpose was violence. Peace tells me that my purpose is belonging. Hassan dared me to belong to the human family in middle of an inhumane war, to fight for peace instead of being used as a weapon, to live through the violence by interrupting it instead of collaborating with it. Hassan was the bravest warrior on that battlefield because she fought for all of us, not just herself and not just her side. Peace was her battle cry. Hassan's choice to honor my humanity before I acknowledged hers, to move toward her before she knew if I was trustworthy, before she knew what it would cost her, this is what gave me the freedom to leap from my false patriotism and blind Christian nationalism. Hassan is the reason that I'm waging peace today. She showed me that no one is outside of our jurisdiction to love, that I belong to the human family of 8 billion that couldn't be divided by our governments, by borders, or even by the flag that I wore on my uniform. I wish she could see the lives that she's made possible when she invited me in on that hot, ordinary Wednesday afternoon. I wish she knew that my sons have a fully alive mother because of her. Suicide takes veterans' lives at twice the rate of civilians, and it steals the lives of female veterans like myself at double their male counterparts. But I'm still here because she showed me how to live for something, not just against something. She showed me how to choose to live when PTSD and trauma convinces so many of us to give up on life altogether. Waging war is what we are willing to die for, but waging peace is how we find out what is worth living for. I wanted to have the courage to live like Hassan, the courage to fight like Hassan. I went to war knowing what I would die for. It had always unquestionably been my country and God. But I came home knowing what was worth living for, peace. Now, I had thought that I left the violence of the war behind me, and then my sons were born. With dark lashes, white skin, and one with the widest smile you'll ever see and stunning black skin. Watching Tamir Rice, a boy who looked just like my own, gunned down while playing at his playground, made my body feel riddled with the war again. The cop fired 2 shots within 2 seconds of opening his car door. And America left a 12-year-old child to bleed out instead of saving his life. Even in war, I had never witnessed that kind of evil. We had rules of engagement that meant we didn't shoot on playgrounds or return fire near civilians, And every life on the battlefield was ours to save, whether they were enemies or civilians. My battalion of 500 soldiers were in a war zone for over a year, and we didn't kill a single person. Body counts are not for playgrounds. I felt my wartime defenses creep back in. I'm fighting to raise my sons in a time when hate crimes are rising against our black communities, when right-wing nationalists are growing around the globe and have captured the presidency of the United States, when white supremacists march in our streets, and I have to accept the unacceptable, that my son is growing up in a country that is more dangerous for him because he doesn't have skin like me. And there will be moments when I cannot protect him because through the twisted lens of bigotry, America sees black people as criminal, brown people illegal, queer and trans people immoral, indigenous people savage, women and girls property. When they fail to see that all of our bodies are belonging to their America, it becomes easier to deport us, imprison us, legislate our human rights away, all for the illusion of power and security. This was my second lesson in waging peace. Violence is our only enemy, not people. I realized that we couldn't fight the people. We had to fight the violence ruthlessly, because violence is what's killing us. The gun violence in our schools and the violence in our systems of racism that kill the dignity and humanity of us all. People are not our enemy. The violence they are using is. I realized that I had to disarm violence every single time. Because violence tells us to destroy people, to see their lives and their children as disposable or collateral damage to our policies. While peace shows us who our real enemy is, violence itself. Violence is the problem. People are our sacred responsibility. We can't fight violence with violence without making more of it. And if violence was the answer to violence, America should be doing a victory lap. But we're not. Violence is winning today. War showed me that there is no such thing as bystanders, only collaborators and resistors. The same is true for peace. Peace is how we practice courage instead of being bystanders to the injustice we see, because all violence is unjust. Waging peace is refusing to collaborate with violence. It's how we interrupt any act of violence that denies equality. Our aim is to defeat the violence of racism and win the person over to the side of freedom, because no one is free when they practice prejudice instead of principles. Now, we know we have principles when it's something that we believe is true for ourselves, and we also believe it's true for the other person. So, if my life matters, then your life has to matter. So if we can't apply our principles universally, then we don't have principles. We have prejudice. Once we recognize that violence is the problem, peace becomes the only solution. Waging peace is the choice to disarm violence instead of using it. We are not bystanders. We are collaborators or resistors. We can interrupt violence or we can collaborate with it. Now, we become collaborators with violence by staying silent instead of speaking up, by turning a blind eye to injustice instead of standing up to those it harms. We are not each other's enemy. Violence is our enemy, and it's our job to resist every act of violence we see, in word or deed. But what if violence isn't out there? What if it's in our own hands? It was 4 a.m. in Iraq when I woke up to a sergeant calling for me, calling for the medic. I rolled out of my bed and I grabbed my gun and my medic bag. One of my soldiers had cut their wrists, feeling like suicide was the only way out of this war. I bandaged his wrists, not making him look me in the eye, because we both knew that the Army would take his career for this. We were sitting there, and there was another soldier next to me who said, "Hey, medic, you're a conscientious objector, right?" My eyes stayed down. I stared at my boots, and I ignored him. "I'm a truck driver," he said, "and it's dangerous out here. I have a wife and 2 kids back home, too. But I refuse to load bullets in my weapon. I'm not an official conscientious objector," he rambled on, "but I'm a Christian. We love our enemies. We don't kill them." His words stung me. I had never met a Christian who put God's commandment, "do not kill," above their own life. In that moment, I realized that choosing between us versus them is a false choice. And I knew that I couldn't be whole while I took the life of another. But if I gave my life away, gave it away in love for someone else, I wouldn't really lose, even if I lost my life. So in a dusty tent clinic, somewhere in Iraq, I looked at that truck driving soldier, and I said, "Me too." Back in my tent that night, instead of securing my gun under my cot like I usually did, I held out my 9mm Beretta in my hands, and I slid my thumb along the magazine until it clicked out, and 15 shiny bullets landed in my hand. My thumb flicked the first bullet out of the magazine, and it landed in the bottom of my ammo box with a click. With each bullet released, I felt the pounding in my chest quieted. Now empty, my gun didn't look any different. No one would be able to tell that it didn't hold the standard 15-issue bullets. But nothing would ever be the same again for me. Peace flooded over me. The next day, I remember swinging my medic bag on my back, standing taller than I had the day before. Fear of death didn't own me anymore. I had pushed it back just enough to take a life-saving breath. The war still scared the bejesus out of me, but I finally knew who I was. I was more than my fear. For the first time since landing in Iraq, I woke up without the same old fear clawing at my belly. There was so much peace in knowing that I would step in front of a bullet for anyone, anytime, but I wouldn't use a bullet to take a life. I was still scared of the possibility of watching one of my soldiers get blown up in front of me and not being able to save their life. I didn't want to die, but the fear of death didn't own me anymore. And the pressure to be willing to kill to prove my allegiance to my country no longer ruled me. I didn't know what was going to happen next. That's part of living in the middle of a war. But I knew who I was going to be in the middle of it. This was my third lesson in waging peace. Nonviolence is how we find our own freedom, and how we help other people find theirs. Finding my freedom not to harm another person felt like holding your breath underwater and breaking the surface of that moment when your lungs are burning. I could breathe for the first time. And I will never live without that. The world tells us that we can't live without violence, that we need it, that it's a necessary evil, and we won't survive without it. But I don't think that we truly will start to live until we can give it up. Until we disarm ourselves of violence, we cannot be free. Free from the us versus them dividing lines. Free from being a bullet loaded in the chamber aimed at another person through our systems of white supremacy and false patriotism. Anything that convinces us to accept violence or requires us to do it, they already own our freedom. Violence requires us to make someone's life disposable. Peace defeats violence because it convinces us to defend each other instead of eliminate each other. Peace becomes our purpose. And we know our purpose, we become unstoppable. Now, I believe that waging peace is the call to action of our times. Because peace forges belonging instead of division. Peace does what bullets and bombs can't. It wins people. Peace wins people to its side because it connects us to our purpose, belonging to each other. Peace shows us who the right enemy is. And violence is our only enemy, not each other. People are our most sacred responsibility. Waging peace is how we disarm violence and we fight for each other in order to get what war can never give us: justice and joy. Nonviolence is how we find our own freedom and help others find theirs. It's how we fight for what we want and win. Because peace requires us to fight for each other, defend each other, and demand justice for each other. True freedom requires us to practice justice by putting love on display in public. Now, loving ourselves feels good, but it's practicing self-supremacy. Loving only those who look like us is practicing prejudice. This is where many of us, where I found myself, thinking that I was the good guy for so long. So how do we practice waging peace? In 3 steps. Are you ready? Just 3 steps. Of all this that I've told you, it's going to be so simple, you will not believe it. Number 1, in order to wage peace, show up. And if you don't remember anything else that I tell you this entire night, just that one, show up. Because nothing good can happen if we don't put ourselves alongside the people that need it. So every time someone raises their hands and says that violence is harming them or their community, blackmail yourself to show up. Commit to it. Show up to that city hall meeting. Show up to that vigil. If you wonder who they're asking to come, just know that it's you. Show up to that public school and support that teacher once a week. But show up. Number 2, in order to wage peace, we commit. No one wages war for one day. They show up again and again. So when we wage peace, we commit ourselves to show up alongside communities who are fighting for what they need to thrive and for their voice to be heard. Commit to showing up in person once a month until the day you die. And if that brings a little panic to you when I say that, me too. I was scared the very first time that I committed to showing up. So I brought my elementary schoolers to come with me to give me courage. But I was also a cancer hospice nurse, and I know that when we're at the end of our life, these are the things that we will never, ever regret. So show up in person in our community once a month. And commit to doing it till you can't do it anymore. You will never regret it. Number 3, in order to wage peace, we plan to celebrate. When we are showing up, committing to work for justice with our neighbors, we are going to have something good to celebrate. It might be the celebration of passing fair housing legislation, or a family moving from a shelter into a permanent home. Or it might be a 5-year-old getting to have a Spider-Man birthday cake. When we are committed, we can plan to celebrate good things happening together. This is the power of putting love on display in public. It's how we activate justice and we instigate joy. How are you experiencing joy? Who are you fighting for joy alongside? Because when executive orders and news of mass deportations and hate crimes hit us hard, it feels like our joy won't survive this. And in those moments, I look at my sons' faces and I remember the way Hassan fought for me with love instead of fear. How she was the bravest one on the battlefield because she fought for all of us. And I knew we had a choice to make. We could stick to the script, or our family could take a chance. So our family put on our winter boots, and we grabbed each other's hands, and we marched in the darkness for Michael Brown. His mama asked us to say Michael's name, so we did. We chose to love like Hassan. No one would be outside of our yes. When anyone in our community raised their hand and asked people to show up, we would do it. We decided that we would be the first one to love, because love never fails. We were going to throw kindness around like confetti, to love like it was growing on trees, without needing to determine if the person in front of us deserved it or not. This was our family's battle cry. We stopped talking about peace, and we started to be the peace. We do it because peace isn't the absence of conflict, it's the showing up in the middle of it. Committing ahead of time to show up with people didn't feel safe, but neither was laying down my weapon in the war. But it's what we do when we belong to each other. We pledged our allegiance to love, to refuse to give up our joy by working for justice. Waging war is what we are willing to die for. But waging peace is how we find out what is worth living for. So here's my question for us. Will we find our own freedom? Will we use it to belong to the brotherhood instead of being divided by nationalism? Will we call out the violence instead of using it? History is watching us. Now is the time that we make peace our purpose, nonviolence our non-negotiable, and belonging our lifeline, tethering us to a future where everyone is ours to fight for. Waging peace is how we say that violence is the enemy, and people our sacred responsibility, and everyone is in our jurisdiction to love. And we're going to show up again and again until our work for justice turns into joy and we have something to celebrate, so that one day you will see my son as your own and protect him when I am not there. You will disarm the violence in the ones who want to hurt him instead of celebrate him. You will teach him how to fight with love instead of hate. And you will wrap your arms around him the way Hassan wrapped her arms around me. Because he is yours and you are his. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we're going to do questions now for Diana. So we have a microphone on either side. We have people who can bring the microphone to you. For the benefit of the folks listening and watching on the live stream, please wait and ask your question once you have a microphone. So the floor is open.
Do you have a favorite kid?
I have 2 favorite kids, and he just asked that question. Does anyone else want to know if you're my favorite? Because I will definitely say yes.
Are you in contact with Hassan?
Do I need to repeat that? Did you hear that?
No, it was in the mic.
Okay.
Are you in contact with Hassan?
I was in contact with her, and her grandson she was the matriarch of the village. Like, she called the shots, but there had to be, like, a male in charge, and so she had a grandson who was, like, 16, and he contacted me. I have no idea how he did, but I remember getting a phone call in the middle of the night, and I was like, who is this? He's like, Diana, Miss Diana, and I was like, oh my gosh. So I have lost that was the last time that I knew that the village of Ann Nazaria was okay, and that has been one of the hardest things for me. As I raised my sons, I kept thinking about her, and I kept thinking about her and wanting to tell her what she made was possible. And it kind of kills me that I don't know whether she's alive. And I did have the chance to go back to Iraq as a peacemaker. And one of the people his village was right next to Ann Nazaria, where I was tenting for a year. And so we both lived this war together, and we ended up working together at this peacemaking organization in Iraq. And Hassan said, Diana, when you come, please come to my home. I want you to come and hold my baby. And when I got to go and be welcomed into his home, he was 17 during the war, and I was 23. And now all these years later, he was a dad, and I was a mom. And I remember sitting on his couch holding his baby, thinking that this is what we have to commit to, is that when we have conflict, we have to commit to being willing to hold each other's babies 20 years later, that there's going to be a future for us and a future for our kids, because you can never kill somebody when you know that their kids, that you're going to hold their kids. And so I feel like she has lived through so many wars that I hope that she is still alive, but I don't know, and travel back has not been possible for quite some time. But thank you for asking about her, because I think about her all the time.
Other questions?
So you spoke about, what I think we would call now white Christian nationalism, this sort of push of the institutional church to war and tribalism and all of this. How do you understand the role of the church in this current moment? How can we be combating that white Christian nationalism with a different kind of Christianity that you speak about?
I think that the call for us today is to do what Hassan did. She was the first person to show me what it looked like to self-sacrificially move towards an enemy instead of take their life. And I have always been fascinated with Jesus. I'm like, wow, this guy who stood on the side of the hungry and the marginalized, and he made the church people really mad all the time, because all of the early Christians, none of them, they said, we can love Christ, but we cannot kill for Christ. And so they were worthless to the Roman Empire because they just wouldn't kill. And so I think that the call for people, and what God is telling all religions, is that we are supposed to commit to being for each other and to interrupt any violence and not have it stop at our borders or our family or our country. Because history tells us that war is a short-term solution with a long-term failure rate. And if people of faith can commit to making the person across the border or across the dividing line to make their life as important as yours, like nobody can defend themselves when somebody actually cares for your kids, when someone says your life is important. And I think that's an individual commitment, and the church has to make that commitment that we're going to be the interrupters of violence. We're going to be the most merciful. We're going to have a greater citizenship. That's not just our country. Because I don't think you can have real humanity if you have a gun behind your back. And it's just, well, I'll kill you if my government says to. I'll kill you if I'm scared. If you're on my property. Like, none of that has been the problem across the present tense, across history. So I think people of faith, and I see it in every single faith, just a very few people. I know Jewish people who choose nonviolence. They're being conscientious objectors today. They're going to jail for it. And I know Muslim conscientious objectors, and I know people from all faiths, but it is a very few who really believe that we're supposed to give our life instead of take a life. But it's so powerful. It's changed the world. So I think that the church could change the world today if they chose to be self-sacrificing instead of self-serving.
Did your superiors ever find out that you carried an empty gun, that you no longer were carrying the bullets?
No, they did not. And I call myself a radical conscientious objector because I didn't wait for somebody else to give me the right not to kill. And there has been many people who have experienced that same thing because it's a process. And I know I have a Jewish friend who she believes in the right that we shouldn't have to kill no matter what. And I think there's that same reality to that. And I also was a medic. When I first started in the Army, I was trained as a sharpshooter, and then my second job was as a medic. And a medic is, you trade in your weapon for your medic bag, and you're there to save lives. You carry a really tiny 9mm Beretta, which despite whatever movies y'all are watching, they are horribly inaccurate. Like, you couldn't even hit something hardly 15 feet away. Like, they are not for killing things. They're kind of paperweights. So no, nobody did find out. But the full story that I didn't tell because it's a short time is in the book. So there's much more nuance to that. But good question.
I was going to ask, what were the negative consequences with your superior officers, and did you have any contact, counseling contact with one of your chaplains, for instance?
Well, chaplain or no, they were typically, so his question was about consequences. So I knew that if I disobeyed an order, then we have an actual military code of justice, and that I would be sent to prison for that in Fort Leavenworth. And so I knew that that was a reality, and that was absolutely worth it to me. It didn't happen, but that is the price and the cost that I would have paid for that. And chaplains, we did not really have one that was doing anything. So anything that you would want to go talk to them about, let's just put it that way.
I know that you didn't really touch on it too much in the speech, but you mentioned that you're a registered nurse. A lot of the students here are nursing students. So I was just curious about
Go nurses!
about like the intersectionality between what you're doing here and how like we as future nurses or nurses in practice can contribute.
Yeah, the beautiful thing about being a nurse or anybody in healthcare is you get this up close look at like the sacredness of the human body, of the soul. And that crosses all borders, all religions, all the time. And when you walk into a patient's room, like you get to witness their humanity, you get to serve them. And I think that having healthcare be true, that it's a human right, that human beings are valuable and sacred and we fight for them. I feel like that is such a powerful thing you can do as a nurse right now, is you get to walk into every single room and stand up for their life. And I have witnessed births, and as a cancer hospice nurse, I have witnessed many deaths. And I don't know what you think, but man, there is a weight and a beauty of a soul that you can feel that leaves when it leaves. And it's a grief for us all. And I was like, why am I crying in bed at night when this patient who I only knew for 2 days passed away? But it's our connection. It's our God-given divine humanity that we are for each other. So I think being nurses is one of the most powerful ways that you can wage peace today, that you can connect things. Because when you serve people, they cannot dismiss you. So thank you for doing that. And continue to hold your values, that it is a human right. It's not just for those who can pay, and it's not just for certain people, that's who we are.
Other questions?
Nobody had asked about bocce ball or the competitive card games, but that's okay, you guys, that's okay.
Is there ever a just war?
What did you say?
Is there ever a just war?
I think that the majority of time and academia and Christian theologians, like the amount of time that people have spent justifying just war is such a telling thing, that whether there is or there isn't, the amount of times that we need people to stop waging war is so great. And so I'm going to leave people to hold that one. But I can tell you that in the Department of Defense, after each war, they do a little checks, they do inventory. So they're like, what was our goal, and then did we meet our goals or not? Because we're very pragmatic. And in the last 4 wars, the Department of Defense have said that they have failed their goals for the last 4 wars, like the last 75 years. So, and the most concerning thing that the report that the Army said about the Army is that despite the fact that they have been unsuccessful in their own goals, they see no possibility that they're not going to continue to do it again. So I think that our time and energy is so much better spent in working for peace, so that more soldiers' lives stay alive, so that the next generation of kids are not going to be brought into the next one. I think we need so much more action for peace than justification for war. Like, we know I'm a 3rd generation Army veteran, so obviously this is family value. In the 250 years of America's history, we've been at peace for 17. So we need a culture that values our kids and our futures. That's what we need more books on. I wrote a book, you should get it. To the young lady over there.
Can you tell us about your buttons? I can't quite see from here.
Oh,
The question is, can you tell us about your buttons?
my button says, "We cannot walk alone," and that's a Martin Luther King Day quote. And then the other one is one of my dog tags, which if you're a medic, you know they're actually toe tags for dead bodies. And it always reminds me why I show up and tell stories that are hard for me to tell. Because dying people is the worst thing that we're losing. That if we don't start to fight for peace, more and more of these dog tags will be on people's loved ones, here and overseas. So I know that it reminds me that it's worth the fight, because life is always worth the fight. And it's my commitment to show up instead of hide out, because I do want to hide out about every other day. So this reminds me why that lives are on the line.
I would like to call your attention to Augustinianism. Do you know Augustine? Do you recognize that name?
Could you repeat that?
Augustine.
Yes.
Saint Augustine, who was very important in church history, but he shaped how Catholics, indeed Lutherans, look at the world in the sense of we are souls, which is Platonism, trapped in the body, and our end run is to get into heaven. That's Augustinianism, which became Southern Baptist, Missouri Synod Lutheran, you name it, okay? And it's a totally different world than the Jesus world of loving your enemy, living simply.
Melting your guns down into plowshares.
Amen, sister.
Gotcha, brother.
Yep.
I'm just wondering if you could describe what peace looks like as we're living our lives. And I've heard some people saying, "Oh, we're gonna get into a civil war, and we're gonna get in and ooh, there's bad people, and ooh." So sending peace into that.
So my definition of peace is when everyone has a seat at the table and they have what they need to thrive. Pretty simple. And it's only simple because that's exactly what we want for ourselves. So if my kids have full bellies at night and a safe place to sleep, then that means that I need to make sure that the next person's kid in my city has a full belly and a safe place to sleep at night. When you walk in somewhere, you know what peace looks like. And you know when it's not there. So I think it's really, really simple, is that what you want for yourself, if you have it already, make sure the person next to you has it. That's it. And pick one thing that you care about, that you're really glad. Like some people, they love sports. They love that their kids do 6 sports a day. Great. But make sure that when you pay for that soccer fee, that you look behind you and you pay for another child to have that same equal opportunity. That's what we want. And I think that's what we all need. And when we have that, when everyone has a seat at the table and has what they need to thrive, war doesn't seem worth it. War won't seem worth it. Because it breaks things, and we never get them back. Never get it back. So I don't think peace is fancy. I used to think, is this like thing you can't really touch out there, but it's not. It's super simple. Everybody gets a seat at the table, and everybody gets what they need to thrive. And we're not talking like we're not talking about like have everything you want. We're just saying like a seat at the table and just what you need to thrive. It's pretty simple, and Americans go to other countries on service trips and they do these things. So I think we know what it looks like for our neighbors, and I think it's so possible. And honestly, I think that we want to do that stuff. I always say that I wasn't a bad person then, and I'm certainly not a good person now. I just got a better invitation. I got a better invitation to live my life and live my faith. And I will never live without that. It's a freedom that I didn't know that I needed. And I think everybody deserves that.
Thank you so much for your talk, Diana. My name is also Diana. Very cool name.
Way to
see
go.
it. I'm really curious. So the 3 next steps, commit, and show up, and get ready to celebrate, feel very important, tangible fractals towards waging peace, like individual actions that people can take. But I'm curious, individual action has its limitations in a culture of violence, and what are sort of your ideas or ideas that you've read that sort of move us culturally along?
Yeah.
Other efforts to be looking towards on the national level and things like that for waging peace.
Yeah, Martin Luther King, he said, a law can't make somebody love me, but can make it a lot harder for them to kill me. So, yeah, we're going to pass some laws that make it a lot harder for us to harm each other, a lot harder for us to deny each other basics like food and shelter and health care. So, yeah, we take our individual steps, but I also know that when we pass legislation and laws, then we get to move forward so much faster. Like in Minnesota, every single school kid gets to eat. And that sounds really great, but also what a low bar. So we're gonna be nice people because we're gonna let kids eat at school. I think if we pass laws, we get to move so much faster forward as a people, and also as a world. There's a lot, you might have heard people talk about the Geneva Convention. And if you haven't, it's because you might not have needed it. But the Geneva Convention gives human rights even in the middle of conflict and war. And I think that is something that changed, it protected me. So that if I got taken as a prisoner of war, Geneva Convention said that they couldn't rape me or torture me or kill me, and they had to give me food and health care, and they had to let my family know where I was. These are ways that we make laws that say people are always going to have conflict, but we can have civility and humanity in the middle of it. We're going to restrain the worst instincts in us because there's so much better out there. So I think we do need to pass some common sense gun laws. The military has a very common sense gun laws, and I wrote about it. And the military, we're not scared of guns. We know how to use them, and this is how we lock up our guns, and this is how we make sure that we're safe, because people's lives matter. The mission matters more than somebody else's stuff. So I think we need a lot of systems to change, and we need a lot of laws to get us faster there, and people are working on it.
Yes, I agree with a lot of what you say, but in practical practice, how do you wage peace against an individual who is bound to do you harm, or your neighbors? How do you defend yourself? Or like the nation of Ukraine, can Ukraine practice peace and stop the Russians from killing them? These are practical aspects of it that I just don't understand.
There's many people who have written about this. And I absolutely thought all the same things you think. And I dearly love people who do. And at the same time, the cycle of violence and what most people experience isn't in Ukraine or Russia. The violence that Americans are doing to each other is never a stranger. I can give you the statistics of who's killing who, and it's in your family, and it's people who know you. But I also know that if we don't change the cycle of using violence as a one-trick pony, like if anything happens, just violence. If anything happens, just this. Like we've done that again and again and again, and statistically, it's a failure. And it costs so many lives and money. Right now, the US they haven't even written into the budget about veterans' health care from the Iraq War. Like, it's astronomical. And so I think there is another thing that's possible, and I know this, because 60 years ago, my two sons could not go to the same school together. Segregation was as American as apple pie. And one person said, I think that we can change this, and we're going to change this. And the only reason that they can go to school together today is because somebody imagined something that didn't exist yet. And they boycotted, and they marched, and they went to jail for something better than the same old thing. So that is what we need to do. We can stop reading the news if it doesn't make you take action to build something better. Because the old ideas aren't working anymore. They're just not. So if we don't change, we're going to get more of the same and more of the same. And so I'm committed to change. Thank you.
Other questions? Diane, I had a question while folks are maybe gathering their last thoughts. When you mentioned the Geneva Convention, it made me wonder. So could you say more about what your day-to-day sort of life was like in the village where you had these experiences? You tell these really inspiring stories about the family you met there, but like what was the day-to-day like?
So you're talking about day-to-day life for an Iraqi in a village or day-to-day life as a soldier?
No,
okay, this is really cute, Tim, because this is the exact same question that all the students at lunchtime asked today. They were like, so like, what's your day like? So nitty-gritty, I think that the definition, well, I'm not going to give that. That's a big downer to end on, but hello, Sister Lois. Thanks so much for coming. I think that most people know about war from blockbuster Hollywood movies. And the reality of it is that it's terrifying, traumatizing, and also really, really boring. Like, if anyone has been in the military, it's like, hurry up and wait. Like, you're either doing horrible things or you're like waiting to do something. And so my day-to-day life as a combat medic and I was in the preemptive strike, so it was in the very beginning of the invasion, was that I was assigned to 100 soldiers in our company, and whoever had the most dangerous mission of the day. So if they were having to drive on a supply line that had a lot of IEDs or a lot of snipers, whichever squad had the dangerous mission of the day, that's who would get the medic. And so I spent a year traveling in a Humvee across the most dangerous missions of the day. So, I was scared all the time that I was going to see someone get blown up and I wasn't going to be able to save them. And I knew their families because we were National Guard people, so like we knew each other. for years. So a lot of driving in a Humvee, and then I was with combat engineers, and so it was much more of occupying a country. And so they would build roads, and they would build culverts. And so that was actually what I was doing in Hassan's village and Nazariya. They were building a culvert that had washed out for a school. So it's like 120 degrees, and I have to watch people build a road for 12 hours a day while being worried that we're going to get shot at. So terrifying, and then also like horrible boredom all at the same time. And there's more in my book about that, but I want to tell you, as long as I am here, that Tim O'Brien is a Vietnam War veteran, and he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning author who wrote one of the most read books on war in America. And he says that instead of saying the word war, we should say what it is every time we use it in conversation. And he said that war is slaughtering people, including children. That is why war is the thing that we should fight so hard to keep our soldiers out of and out of doing those things. Because anyone who's been in war knows that's exactly the truth of what happens in war. It's exactly what's happened in Israel's war on Gaza. Slaughtering people, including children. And so we wage peace because we don't want to be that, and we don't want to do that, and we don't want to make people carry that for the rest of their lives. So we're waging peace so that we can give our children and people in our borders and across the world a future together. Thank you for that question, Tim. I gave the students a different answer, but...
No, thank you. That was great. Any last questions for Diana?
I have a short question. How far into your service was it before you took all the bullets out of your gun?
The convoy was, not even a week. Like, I hadn't even been there a week. We had just, rolled in, and we were going to go into enemy territory. So that was a week. And I was there 397 days. And so I think it was about halfway. And before that, well, I won't tell you what else happened before that. You'll have to read the book. But it was about halfway is when I knew that I was not the same person. And I didn't know if the people I was coming home to would ever be okay, because I wasn't the person that left. And the person that I most didn't know would be able to accept that war had changed me, that I wasn't the same person, is sitting right over there. And he married me. He married me even though I wasn't the person that he fell in love with. And I would never be the same. But it was about 6 months in when I knew that nothing was the same, and I wouldn't be the same. And I didn't know how to live in a world where people who wore my uniform did the things they did, and where people who had my same faith were torturing people in Abu Ghraib prison 10 miles away from where I was. I didn't know how to live in the middle of this. And so taking my bullets out was the way that I was going to survive in a place that was unsurvivable. And many people don't. They might come home, but they don't really survive. And they don't end up living until they're 80. They're called diseases of despair. And so taking my bullets out was the way that I stayed alive. And I fought for life, for mine. And so I know that hits for a lot of people. And I'm a third generation veteran, so like I get it. But also, staying alive matters. And people need to choose how to do that. And I think if more people did, we might have a lower suicide rate for veterans. So it definitely changed my life, but I also think that it allowed me to stay in instead of giving up. The students did not ask that question.
Diana, that makes me think of over the New Year there were 2 incidents of domestic violence, both committed by veterans, both decorated, and one drove a car into a street in New Orleans and killed lots of people, and the other one blew up his Tesla in Las Vegas in front of the Trump Hotel. And he had written a suicide note. He had killed himself before the explosion. That we need to have more masculinity in this country. And he talked about how we need to be supporting Trump and Musk. And it reminds me of how much PTSD there is. There's a friend of mine at the Y who has broken, and these people come back, with their lives are ruined. They ruin the lives of people around them, and we don't take care of them. And that's the way the terrorism that we inflict on the soldiers comes back to us. And could you talk about that at all?
I'm only going to say that violence ricochets, and you can't use it without it ricocheting back at you or at somebody that you love. Like, it steals our humanity. And when we use it, we pay a pound of flesh for it. And we can see what it does to people. And they didn't grow up like that. No, that is somebody's son. Like, nobody wants to grow up to be either of those two people who did those acts of violence. But our culture of violence, because I'm a nurse, I always think of it like cancer. And cancer invades healthy cells, eats up healthy cells, and replicates itself. And the only thing that we do to save people's lives from cancer is we cut it out. We cut out the cancer, and then the body rejuvenates, heals itself. And I think that violence is cancerous. It infects healthy people, whole people, and it eats up our good stuff. And then we pass it on. We infect the next person with it. And so I do fight for peace because I want to protect soldiers' lives. I want more soldiers to stay alive this year than last year. I want more kids to stay alive this year than last year. And it's going to take being self-sacrificing. It's going to take changing what we do. And I'm committed to doing it because body counts should be in Baghdad, not in Las Vegas. It shouldn't be in our schools. It shouldn't be in Pulse nightclub. Like, we don't have to accept this. We have to make violence the enemy, and we have to get in front of it because it's stealing people that we love, and it won't stop. Statistically, it is multiplying itself. So peace is patriotic. Thank you for that question.
I think we should end it there. Please join me in thanking Diana Oestreich for spending the evening with us.
Thank you.
As a reminder, there are books for sale from Fitger's bookstore in the lobby, and Diana is going to stick around to chat further and maybe sign a copy of your book. And we also have sign-up sheets out there if you would like to be on our mailing list for our events on April 24th and 25th. Thank you very much.